It is fallacious to claim that just because a religion cannot be disproven, that it is therefore plausible. The burden of proof exists on the shoulders of those making such a claim. Philosopher Bertrand Russell articulated this in his parable of the celestial teapot. He explained, "Many orthodox people speak as though it were the business of skeptics to disprove dogmas, rather than the dogmatists to prove them. This is, of course, a mistake. If I were to suggest that between the Earth and Mars there is a china teapot revolving around the Sun in an elliptical orbit, nobody would be able to disprove my assertion, provided I were careful to add that the teapot is too small to be revealed by even our most powerful telescopes. But if I were to go on to say that, since my assertion cannot be disproved, it is therefore intolerable presumption on the part of human reason to doubt it, I should rightly be thought to be talking nonsense. If, however, the existence of such a teapot were affirmed in ancient books, taught as the sacred truth every Sunday, and instilled into the minds of children at school, hesitation to believe it would become the mark of eccentricity. None of us feels an obligation to disprove any of the millions of far-fetched things that a fertile or facetious imagination might dream up. Most people are atheists when it comes to Zeus, Apollo, Amun-Ra, Mithras, Baal, Thor, Wotan, the golden calf, or the flying spaghetti monster. Aristotle infamously noted that men create the gods after their own image, not only with regard to their form, but with regard to their mode of life. You say you've experienced God directly? Well, some people have experienced a pink elephant, but that probably doesn't impress you. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, distinctly heard the voice of Jesus telling him to kill women, and he was locked up for life. George Bush says that God told him to invade Iraq. Some people think that they're Napoleon, or Charlie Chaplin, or that the entire world is conspiring against them. We have names for people who have beliefs for which there is no rational justification. When their beliefs are extremely common, we call them religious. But otherwise, they like to be called mad, psychotic, or delusional. Clearly, there are sanity in numbers. And yet, it's merely an accident of history that it is considered normal in our society to believe that the creator of the universe can hear your thoughts, while it is demonstrative of mental illness to believe that he is communicating with you by having the rain tap Morse code on your window. There is evidence that in the population at large, atheists are likely to be drawn from among the better educated and more intelligent. Several research studies have been published on the statistical relationship between religiosity and educational level, or religiosity and IQ. Michael Shermer, in How We Believe, The Search for God in an Age of Science, describes a large survey of randomly chosen Americans, and he and his colleague, Frank Sulloway, carried out this experiment. Among their many interesting results was the discovery that religiosity is indeed negatively correlated with education. Religiosity is also negatively correlated with interest in science and with political liberalism. On the subject of religion and IQ, a meta-analysis was published by Paul Bell in Mensa magazine in 2002. Bell concluded, of 43 studies carried out since 1927 on the relationship between religious belief and one's intelligence and/or educational level, all but 4 found an inverse connection. That is, the higher one's intelligence or education level, the less one is likely to be religious. John Stuart Mill was right when he said, "The world would be astonished if it knew how great a proportion of its brightest ornaments, of those most distinguished, even in popular estimation, for wisdom and virtue, are complete skeptics in religion." Religion teaches us that it is virtuous to be satisfied with not understanding. It intrinsically applauds mediocrity in the realms of rational and scientific inquiry. Science may not have all the answers yet, but that doesn't mean for a second that religion does. Preachers who dismiss 3/4 of the world's population as ignorant heathens, doomed to spend the afterlife in eternal damnation, and who in the same breath would insist that the earth and the heavens had been created in 7 days, all geologic and astrophysical evidence to the contrary. And why, just why, Would an ever-loving God curse people to hell simply because they grew up in a culture where another religion was a societal norm? After all, didn't God put them there in the first place? Would an ever-loving and all-powerful God really allow poverty, war, disease, destruction? Philosopher David Hume famously noted that Epicurus' old questions are yet unanswered. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil? The Bible's full of rubbish. Talking snakes. Snakes don't have voice boxes. Parting an ocean. That's not possible. Putting every organism onto one boat. That's ridiculous. And walking on water, etc. We've given religion such an untouchable status that it's rude to even debate it. Anytime a set of beliefs is unquestionable by society, that's a problem. Instead of coming together and finding out what unites us with the universe, we're ready to wipe each other out, based on blind faith. To assume that the world works on the same set of principles that we do is arrogant and intellectually weak. We may all like to consider ourselves autonomous individuals and free thinkers. But if an answer to any question demands a leap of faith, is it really an answer at all? Religion's role in perpetrating world conflict is in immeasurable proportions. From inquisitions to crusades, the roots of the sheer majority of conflicts throughout history have found their roots in religious soil and sentiment. Look into any over-the-top, cruel atrocity in the world, and chances are you'll find some scripture to support it. They preach love, but practice exclusion, and they display a toxic intolerance to different views. Catholic preachers tell poor people in Africa that condom use is sinful. Here we have no discernible suffering, yet Catholics report that condom use is ethically problematic. Millions of people who die in AIDS in Africa have Catholic ministers preaching to them the sins of condom use, where the only source of this information is from the ministers themselves. And stem cell research, one of the most promising lines for developing medical therapies, has been impeded by a medieval notion that the soul enters the zygote at the moment of conception. If I were to tell you that I believed that there was a diamond buried in my backyard, and it was the size of a refrigerator, it might occur to you to ask me why I believed this. And if in response I gave the sorts of responses you might hear from religious moderates, explaining the good effects of believing this. So that's things like, well, this belief gives my life a lot of meaning, or I wouldn't want to live in a world where there wasn't a diamond in my backyard that's the size of a refrigerator. It really becomes clear that such responses are deeply inadequate. Religious moderates are even more intellectually bankrupt than fundamentalists. You see, the fundamentalists have actually read the books. Religious moderates, they just cherry-pick the parts they like. According to the Bible, the creator of the universe does hate homosexuals. I mean, repugnance is flawlessly epitomized by the Bible. Jesus says in Luke 19, "Anyone who doesn't want me to reign over him, bring him before me and slay him before me." Ever-loving God, right? The book of Leviticus says that slavery is acceptable and tells us we must kill anyone who curses their mother or father, commits adultery, or if they're homosexual. The book of Exodus tells us that anyone who works on the Sabbath day must be put to death. Deuteronomy chapter 13 tells us that if there is a town where people do not believe in Jesus Christ, quote, "You must attack that town and completely destroy all of its inhabitants, as well as all the livestock. Then you must pile all the plunder in the middle of the street and burn it." Religion arbitrarily decides that some people are not fully human. Non-believers, believers in other religions, and women in particular. The Christian Bible claims that God made women from the flesh of man, and Exodus says that when a man sells a woman as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. In other words, if there's a woman slave and she refuses to have sex with the master, she can be killed. That doesn't sound very nice. Is this really the inerrant word of an ever-loving God? We're told that the Christian God is loving, yet the Bible shows us that he's a capricious judge, bent on retribution and violence against those who disobey his arbitrary rules. Religion inhibits us from seeking to fully understand and enjoy the natural beauty of the world. It distracts us from truth and encourages us to seek unattainable knowledge of the afterlife and supernatural. Douglas Adams famously posed the question, "Isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful, without having to believe that there are fairies at the bottom of it too?" And despite overwhelming evidence for evolution, a rejection of science that does not favor their dogma typifies the response of religious moderates.